In today's video, I'm going to show you how to remove trim without breaking it. Hopefully. So currently I'm in the process of installing some built-ins underneath this staircase, and as you can see, there's some baseboard and trim right where the built-ins are going to go. We're going to need to remove that baseboard and trim in order for the built-ins to sit flush on the wall. I do want to keep these pieces intact as best as I can. As you can see, I already started removing it a little bit on this side, but when we get to this side, I'm going to show you exactly how I like to do it to keep the pieces from breaking. Alright, so some of the tools we're going to need for this job. First tool is going to be some sort of razor blade or knife in order to cut the caulking which separates the trim and the wall. Next, you're going to need some pry bars. I like to use these smaller pry bars. It helps pulling the trim away from the wall as well as the shoe molding if it's attached to the baseboard as well. Also going to need a hammer just in case the trim is a little bit more difficult, or if you need to kind of hammer those pieces of pry bar underneath the trim. And I also like to have some tape to place along the baseboard just in case you're prying up against some hardwood floors or something that you need to protect. All right, first step here, we're going to go ahead and put some tape down. That's going to protect the hardwood floor as we pry against it to get the shoe molding off. Now the first step in the process is going to be taking your razor blade and running it across the top to break the seal between the caulking and the trim and the wall. That's very important. Now the reason you want to do this is because it's actually breaking the seal between the trim and the wall, and that way when you pry the trim off, it doesn't pull any drywall with it. Now what you're going to want to do is try and find a spot on this shoe molding or quarter round where you have a space between the floor and the trim. That's going to be the first initial spot you're going to want to put your pry bar. So I actually found a little space right here. So I'm going to take my finished pry bar and try to push it up underneath this trim. Being really careful to push in and pry up just a little bit. You don't want to go too crazy because this wood can be kind of fragile, and it's also very expensive to replace. You can also use your hammer a little bit to tap in that pry bar if you need to. Alright, so you can see there I was able to tap that in just a little bit. So now I'm going to put some downward pressure and pry up on that trim just a little bit. Now I'm going to take my other pry bar and place it next to the first pry bar and kind of use both of them in conjunction with each other to slowly work that trim out. So generally this trim is held in with like 3-inch, I almost said screws, it's not screws, 3-inch nails, trim nails, and they're pretty easy to pry out, but you got to be real careful. You can kind of work your way to one end and then work your way back to the other. Now that you've created a little bit of space, you can move your pry bar to the top side of the trim and pry in and out, and that's going to actually pull that trim away from the baseboard. There you go. Once you get to the end of your trim, that's the easiest place to start a crack. So you want to be real careful and real slow on that end piece. And I found it's best to pry directly where the nails are. The nail's actually going to give the trim a little bit of strength. So if you're prying in a space where there's no nail, it's going to allow that trim to bend. So you want to try and pry next to where your nails are. Alright, so now that we have that end piece completely free, we can just work our way all the way down the rest of this trim. Alright, so now that we got our piece completely free, all you gotta do is pull the nails out and you're ready to reinstall at a later time or keep for another project. Let's move on to the baseboard. So baseboard can be a little bit more of a challenge to remove than small shoe molding. Because it's a wider piece of trim, there's a lot more nails holding it in, and also you have caulking and painting that can really keep that stuff stuck on the wall. So like I showed you in the beginning, it's super, super important to run a blade down your trim and do it a couple times to make sure you have completely removed the bond between the caulking and trim. I'm actually thinking about doing this for a third time because I think there's a couple spots where I see where it's still stuck to the wall. But you're going to start at the bottom of the baseboard and kind of pry it up a little bit, and you're going to watch the top of the baseboard as you go down to make sure the baseboard is actually pulling away from the wall and the caulking isn't coming with it and it's not pulling any of the paper of the drywall up. All right, let's get in here and I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. So here in the corner, you can kind of see how I'm able to get my blade actually down in between the baseboard and the wall. That's showing that that's completely removed from the wall. So let's go ahead and pry up just a little bit. Give it a little wiggle, and that's going to start removing the bond between the baseboard and the wall. So now we're going to try and push our pry bar in between there. All right, cool. So I have a good bit of separation. Another thing you want to be careful with is, depending on the type of baseboard that you have, for instance this one, it's got a little tiny bump on the top. It's really easy to pry against that and snap it off. Then you're going to have a repair, or you're just going to have to completely replace that piece of baseboard later. All right, so we're going to slowly pry. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like this was held in with a whole lot of nails. I think this is going to come off pretty easy. And like I said, I do want to be careful and remove this all in one piece as much as I can. I think this is some actually pretty high quality baseboard. I removed some in an upper bedroom in this house, and I think it was made out of poplar, which is pretty rare these days for quality trim materials in a house. The other thing we want to be real careful is that if we are prying against the wall here, you can dent and damage this drywall if you're not prying in an area that has a stud. So, and really, I can't tell you how much pressure it takes to do that. You really just kind of have to figure it out. But as long as you're prying back behind where the baseboard is, or prying in an area like near this outlet where a stud is going to be, you've got a good chance of not damaging the actual drywall. But sometimes it's inevitable, and if you're doing this kind of work anyway, you're probably having drywall repairs in your future anyway, so just a little bit more extra added work. Starting to move a little bit, so let's work our way further on down this way. Again, you want to make sure that you're prying against this tape, that way you don't damage the hardwood floors. But you got a little bit of wiggle room where your quarter round sits. But I find it's always good to be careful, regardless of whether your damaged area is going to be covered up. Yep, it looks like this is separated all the way down, so I don't need to run my knife down there anymore. So we should be good to go here in a second once this completely lets go. You also want to be careful in the corners where your miters meet. That's an area where the trim can split off. Oh, there we go. Just came loose. So what I was going to say is, in your corner that's cut flush, or in your center, you can kind of maneuver the pieces of trim out of the miter or out of the corner. That way you don't chip the edge of your trim. So let's go ahead and pull here. Looks like we're going to actually be able to pull just with our hands and kind of work the trim back and forth a little bit. And it looks like whoever installed this trim originally just did a miter cut. So it should be easy to come out with a little bit of strength. There we go. So, it looks like this was probably put in at a later time and not at the same time as the bedrooms upstairs. This doesn't look like it's poplar. It just looks like just normal pine trim. So this is kind of a tight corner, so I'm going to do my best to show you. I got a bunch of furniture and stuff in the way. But same principle. I'm going to start with the shoe molding. I'm going to start at one end and work our way down to the other. And after you do this a couple times, you'll kind of get the feel of the trim and whether or not you're going to break it. So this right here is one of the areas you really want to be careful with. An outside miter cut is really easy to split these if you're not careful. So you want to make sure that any of your caulking is cut real well. And honestly, it looks like whoever originally did this cut didn't actually get a very good miter. So there's a lot of caulking in that gap there. So especially if you're going to save these pieces, you want to take your time and pry it out slowly. And sometimes it's just inevitable and you end up snapping the piece. But thankfully, it looks like we are good to go. I really do hope that this video helped you learn how to remove your trim without breaking any pieces. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.